a new adult story, related to you, me, we all. In some point of our life, we should take correct decision. Or have to regret. For a weak moment, we lose our future. Please listen till end. Also, please subscribe, like and forward. We will meet again at the end of story.
My name's Alex. I'm 19, just a regular guy trying to make sense of things. I live with my dad, Daniel, who works as an architect, always busy with projects. My mom passed away when I was younger, and for a while, it was just me and my dad. That was until he remarried a few years ago. Her name's Charlotte. She's not like any stepmom I've ever imagined. She's young, smart, and honestly, it feels like she's more of a friend than a mother figure. But recently, things have gotten complicated. Let me take you back to that day. The one that changed everything. It started like any other lazy afternoon. My dad was out of town for work, and my mom, well, Charlotte, was running errands, leaving me alone in the house. It's not like I mind being by myself, I've gotten used to it. So I spent the afternoon in my room, lounging around and scrolling through my phone. The quiet of the house was soothing. I had just come out of the shower, still damp, wearing nothing and playing with myself as I was full of desires and single. I was on my bed, phone in hand, completely unaware of the tension building in the house. The house was unusually still. There wasn't a sound, not even the hum of the fridge in the kitchen. I tried to shake off the feeling that something wasn't quite right. That's when I heard a soft knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. My heart skipped a beat. My first instinct was to put my shirt back on, but I hesitated. Who would be at the door? Before I could move, the door creaked open. There she was, Charlotte, standing in the doorway, her eyes locking onto mine in a way I hadn't seen before. She was dressed casually in a light sweater and jeans, her dark hair falling loosely around her shoulders. She seemed uncertain, like she was waiting for something. I didn't know what to do. I had been completely caught off guard. "Sorry," she said, her voice soft but with an underlying tension. I didn't mean to interrupt. I immediately jumped to my feet, trying to grab my shirt and pull it over my head. But something in her expression stopped me. She wasn't angry. She wasn't upset. In fact, she was just watching me, her gaze lingering. "Charlotte," I stammered, my heart racing. I wasn't expecting anyone. She didn't say anything for a moment, just took a slow, deliberate step into the room. There was a strange air about her now, like everything was different. Like this wasn't just a simple visit. She took another step closer and I froze. My pulse was hammering in my chest. I felt exposed, not just physically but emotionally. My mind raced. Should I apologize? Should I tell her to leave? But before I could say anything, she spoke again. "You should have locked the door," she said, her voice soft but with a hint of something more. I didn't know how to respond to that, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from her. There was a magnetic pull between us that I didn't understand, something that made it hard to breathe, hard to think. She was standing so close now. I could feel the heat of her body. Her presence was overwhelming. "I didn't think," I started to say, but the words died in my throat as she stepped even closer, her hand brushing against my bare arm. "I know," she whispered. "You didn't think." There was something in her eyes, something deep, something I couldn't look away from. She was looking at me like she saw through me, like she knew exactly what was going through my mind. It felt like she was waiting for me to make the next move. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us grew thick, electric. I could feel her breath on my skin, and it made my heart race even faster. "Alex," she whispered, her voice low, almost like she was unsure of what to say next. My mind was spinning. But all I could focus on was the way her hand hovered near mine, like she was waiting for me to reach out. Then, without thinking, my hand moved toward hers, trembling ever so slightly. She didn't pull away. She didn't say anything, but the way she looked at me, it was like she was giving me permission. I took a step closer to her, my body moving almost of its own accord. Her eyes didn't leave mine as I reached up to touch her face, my fingers grazing her soft skin. The connection between us was undeniable now, the tension between us unbearable. Just as I leaned in, about to kiss her, the sound of footsteps in the hallway broke the moment. Charlotte quickly stepped back, her face flushed. "We can't," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't right." I stood there, frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. She was right. We both knew it. But I couldn't help the way I felt. Something had shifted between us, and I wasn't sure I could just ignore it. Before I could respond, she glanced over her shoulder toward the door, as if hearing something, and then turned back to me. "We'll talk later," she said quickly, then turned and left the room, her footsteps fading down the hallway. I stood there in stunned silence, the weight of what had just happened hanging in the air. Part of me was relieved, but another part of me wanted to chase after her, to figure out what this all meant. As I sat back down on the edge of my bed, still unsure of what had just transpired, I couldn't shake the feeling that nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed felt like they were stretched out in slow motion. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened between Charlotte and me. There was something more, something deeper. The way her eyes had locked onto mine, the way her breath had quickened when we were close. It all felt too real to ignore. But the worst part was that I couldn't talk to anyone about it. My friends would never understand. My dad certainly wouldn't. And Charlotte, well, she was still my stepmom. We both knew it was wrong, but the tension between us lingered, like an invisible force that neither of us could escape. I tried to keep my distance. I told myself that it was just a moment of weakness, something that we would both move past. But every time I saw her, I couldn't ignore the way she looked at me, the way her gaze lingered just a second too long. It was like she was waiting for something, but I wasn't sure what. One evening, after dinner, my dad was working late again. I was sitting on the couch, flipping through channels when Charlotte walked into the living room. She was wearing a loose sweater and leggings, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. She looked different. More distant but also strangely more alluring. "Hey," she said, sitting down next to me on the couch. "Mind if I join you?" I swallowed, trying to keep my composure. "No, of course not," I replied, my voice betraying the nervousness I felt. She sat close, her shoulder brushing against mine. I could feel the heat radiating from her body, and I had to force myself to keep my thoughts from drifting back to that moment in my room. We watched TV in silence for a while, but the air between us was thick, heavy with unspoken words. I could feel her presence more than I could focus on the show. "So," she began, her voice soft, hesitant. "About the other day?" I stiffened, not sure if I was ready for this conversation. "Charlotte," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I don't know what happened. I don't know why we—" She cut me off, her hand brushing against mine. The contact sent a shock through me like a spark igniting in the air. She didn't pull away this time. Her fingers lingered against mine, gently tracing the lines of my hand. "I know it's complicated," she whispered, her voice barely audible, like she was afraid someone might overhear. "But I can't stop thinking about it, Alex. About you." My heart raced in my chest, the blood rushing in my ears. I had never heard her say anything like that before. It was as if the world had stopped, leaving just the two of us in that moment. I turned to face her, and for the first time, I saw vulnerability in her eyes. She was just as conflicted as I was, maybe even more so. But there was something else too, a yearning, a desire that was impossible to ignore. "Charlotte," I said, my voice shaky. "I don't know what to do. I can't stop thinking about you either." Her breath hitched at my words and she leaned in closer, her lips almost brushing against my ear. "We can't keep pretending this isn't happening," she murmured. "Can we?" I didn't know how to answer. I wanted to pull away, to tell her that we couldn't do this, that it was wrong. But the truth was, I didn't want to. I didn't want to deny the way I felt about her, no matter how confusing or dangerous it seemed. Before I could say anything, she closed the gap between us, her lips brushing against mine in the softest, most tentative kiss I had ever experienced. My entire body went still, the world fading away as I kissed her back, my hands moving to her waist, pulling her closer. The kiss deepened, the tension between us crackling in the air. Her lips were warm and soft, and I felt a surge of something I couldn't name. A longing, a need to be closer to her, to lose myself in the moment. But then, just as quickly, she pulled back, her eyes wide with panic. "We can't do this, Alex," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It's wrong?" I didn't know what to say. Part of me knew she was right, but another part of me didn't care. All I knew was that I couldn't stop wanting her. "Charlotte," I said, my voice low. "I don't care. I just need you." Her gaze softened, and for a moment, I saw the same desire in her eyes that I felt in mine. But then she looked away, her face filled with regret. "I can't," she said, her voice trembling. "I can't do this to your dad. To you." I understood. But it didn't make it any easier. I wanted her more than anything, but the consequences of crossing that line felt too heavy to ignore. She stood up quickly, brushing her hands through her hair in frustration. "We need to stop," she said, her voice firm. "This can't happen again." And just like that, she was gone, leaving me alone in the dimly lit living room, my heart racing, my mind reeling from everything that had just unfolded. The silence that followed felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if I could forget what had just happened. But one thing was clear, Things had changed between us, and I wasn't sure if we could ever go back to how it was before. The days after that night felt like I was living in a fog, unable to focus on anything. My mind kept replaying that kiss over and over again, the way Charlotte had felt in my arms, the softness of her lips against mine. It was like I was addicted, unable to break free from the pull between us. Every time I saw her, I felt that same rush of emotions, that same longing. It wasn't just physical, it was deeper than that. It was as if every part of me was drawn to her in a way I couldn't control. But at the same time, I knew this wasn't right. I couldn't shake the guilt that gnawed at me every time I thought about what had happened. I'd spent my whole life looking up to my dad, trusting him. He was the one who had raised me, who had been there for me through everything. And here I was, about to betray him in the worst way possible. I couldn't stop myself though. The pull I felt toward Charlotte was becoming overwhelming. Every time we were alone, I found myself searching for that connection, that spark that had ignited between us. And every time I saw her, it was like I was in a trance, unable to resist the way she looked at me, the way she made me feel. It was a Saturday morning when I found myself in the kitchen, making breakfast. The house was quiet, the only sound the sizzle of bacon in the pan. I hadn't seen Charlotte yet, but I knew she'd be up soon. My heart raced at the thought of seeing her. I tried to push the thoughts out of my head, but they wouldn't go away. The memory of her body pressed against mine, the way her breath had quickened when we kissed, it was all too much. Just as I was setting the plates on the table, I heard footsteps behind me. My body tensed, and I turned to find Charlotte standing in the doorway, her dark hair cascading down her shoulders in soft waves. She was dressed in a simple blouse and jeans, but to me she might as well have been wearing a dress made of fire. "Morning," she said, her voice soft, but there was something in it, a heaviness that matched how I felt inside. "Morning," I replied, trying to sound casual, though my heart was pounding in my chest. She stepped into the kitchen, her eyes flicking to the food on the table before settling back on me. There was a moment of silence, a charged pause that made the air feel thick. Then she spoke again. "You've been avoiding me," she said, her tone barely a whisper. It wasn't a question, but an accusation. I froze. Was it that obvious? Had I really been avoiding her? "I'm not avoiding you," I stammered, though I knew deep down that I was. It was hard to face her after what happened. But the truth was, I was also drawn to her. Every part of me wanted to close the gap, to reach out and touch her, to feel that connection again. She took a step closer, and I could smell the faint scent of her perfume, a mix of jasmine and something else I couldn't place. Made my head spin. "You know this isn't right," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We can't keep doing this, Alex." I wanted to respond, to tell her that I couldn't help how I felt, that I didn't want to fight it anymore. But instead, I stood there, frozen, my heart torn between what was right and what I wanted more than anything. "I don't know how to stop," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. The words felt like they were slipping out of my mouth before I could stop them. Charlotte's expression softened, but there was a sadness in her eyes now, a sadness I hadn't seen before. She reached out, her hand brushing against my arm in a fleeting touch. "You have to stop, Alex," she said softly, her eyes searching mine. "This isn't just about us. It's about your dad too. It's about everything we've built. Do you really want to destroy that?" Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. The weight of what she said sunk in, and for the first time since that kiss I saw the bigger picture. My dad. The man who had worked so hard to give me everything I had, who had been there for me through every hardship. How could I betray him like this? But the pull I felt toward Charlotte didn't go away. It was still there, simmering just beneath the surface, urging me to give in. I could feel the conflict rising inside me, a battle between my heart and my conscience. "I don't know if I can," I said, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "I don't know how to stop feeling this way about you." Charlotte took a deep breath, her hand dropping to her side. "You have to. For your sake and for mine. And for your dad." Her words were like a cold shower, waking me up to the reality of what was at stake. I couldn't keep chasing something that was never meant to be. I couldn't keep risking everything for a fleeting moment of passion. I turned away, running my hands through my hair in frustration. "I don't want to hurt anyone," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "I don't know what to do anymore." "You don't have to do anything," Charlotte replied quietly. "Just let it go. We have to let it go." Her words cut through the tension in the air, and I finally realized that she was right. I was on the edge of making a choice that would tear everything apart. I couldn't do that. Not to my dad, not to her, and not to myself. With a heavy heart, I nodded. "Okay," I whispered. "We have to stop." But as I turned back toward her, the look in her eyes told me that we both knew the struggle wasn't over. The feelings between us hadn't disappeared, and the temptation would still be there, waiting for us to slip. But in that moment, I knew that if we didn't stop now, we would never be able to fix the mess we were about to create. And I wasn't ready to live with that kind of regret.
Both of them, the mother and son, regretted on their desires. What do you think about their future? Let me know on your comments. Oh yeah, please do not forget to subscribe, if not subscribed till now, before leaving. Thank you and love, you all are my extended family. Thank you again.